Hello. Okay. Hi. So, welcome to the third lecture of the PD workshop. I'm going to be talking about how to whip. Before this starts, I highly suggest that you check out the link below because that should have my presentation. So, hopefully, while I'm talking, you're looking at the presentation and not the video. I don't know, a minute? Yeah. So, I don't know, I have opened the PowerPoint already. So I'm just gonna start. So I'm generally gonna be talking about whipping, both for people who like to whip and people who don't, because it's generally important to have a basic understanding of what you're doing, given this is AP basics. But even if you're not in the whip position, you sort of have to, I guess, understand what your whip needs and how you can best help them in prep, in round, or right before it's their time to speak. So I think this is just good general information for everyone. I'm gonna try to make this as quick and as painless as possible. So if you're looking at the title slide, let's go to the next slide. So another thing before I start, just three things actually. First is that there's no such thing as like hard and fast rules, even when I say there are. So maybe later in my lecture, I'm going to say you absolutely have to do this or never do that. Um, don't listen to me or just take what I say with a grain of salt. Second, not everything will work for you. Obviously, people think differently, people have different styles. So, if you want to try it, give it your best effort. But if it doesn't work, or if what I teach isn't working for your style, that doesn't mean you're never going to be able to whip. It probably just means you can adjust to how your mind works. But that's also in line with the third thing, which is that there's just more than one way to whip. I mean, debate in general is arbitrary, but I think whipping is like way more arbitrary than all the other speakers' positions. So, like, yeah, if it doesn't work, change. So, next slide. Um, I think an important misconception from whipping that a lot of individuals face is that as your time decreases, the amount of things you have to do increase. So the busier you get, the closer it becomes to your speech. But a lot of the times that can be prevented by proper preparation, both in prep and in round, right before you speak. So the way I'm gonna talk about whipping is I'm going to talk about in three different areas. First, what you should be doing in prep. Second, how you should be thinking in round. And third, things you should actually be doing while you're talking. So the first slide generally just talks about when should you be whipping or when should you be in the whip mindset. The answer to that is generally all the time, both in prep, in round, in speech. If you are relaxed during prep or if you are eating, you can eat in prep, but like you still have to be thinking and you have to already think about your speech. But that doesn't mean you don't help the PM or the LO. Help them, but think about you too. And the reason, next slide, why you ought to be doing this is for three things. So, first, in prep, your essential goal is to figure out how to make the debate conform to your case or your speech. This is Asian parliamentary specific. So, this is to say that you essentially control 50% of the debate exactly based on what your team prepares, based on what you can say. So you're not coming to the debate blind or like, I don't know what I'll talk about. Who knows what issues might come out because you technically know 50% of the debate. Or you should know 50% of how the debate's going to go down after prep. So part of what you're doing in prep is figuring out how to make the debate and how to force discussions that are going to conform to your team's case and that can better adhere to your speech. Of course, I'm going to talk about it more specifically next slides, but these are just the top line goals you should have per aspect of the round. So if it's prep, you're figuring out how to create issues or make certain case lines that can already fit into your speech. Second, in round, this is where you have to figure out how to make your speech conform to the debate. So there's a lot more flexibility involved. Last is, especially in your speech, that's when you start executing your plans from prep to adjustments. So just in case you're not looking at the PowerPoint, important thing from this first part is you should be whipping all the time in prep, in round, most especially in your speech. So let's go to the actual first part. What should whips be doing in prep time? And that's essentially three things. First is mapping out possible issues of the debate. Second is thinking what are important conclusions for your case. And third is you should have some idea what are your priorities in your debate. So things you're willing to give up, things you absolutely believe if you give up, you're going to lose the debate. So the mindset in prep is I shouldn't have a completely blank paper. I should have at least the bare bones of how I think the debate's going to work out. And we're going to break each thing you should talk about one by one. So next slide. So I have a sample motion just in case. It's an oldie but a goodie. This House believes that attacking religious sites is a legitimate tactic of war. So assume your government side, and we'll be using this single motion throughout the entire lecture so that we can always stay on track. So this House believes that attacking religious sites is a legitimate tactic of war. First thing you want to do, map out possible issues of the debate. You're not trying to be specific here. You're not trying to decide where your team can win or not. You're not trying to pick out arguments that you want your partners to run. You just don't want to be blindsided by possible issues that might come out. So I guess this is sort of priming your mind to already think of where attacks might come from, what are the kinds of rebuttals you might have to already make up, so that when you actually have to make rebuttals, it's much faster because your brain's like, oh yeah, I already sort of mulled this idea in my head 30 minutes ago or longer or whatnot. So for example, in the motion of attacking religious sites is a legitimate tactic of war, you just want to already think about, it's probably going to be about standards of legitimacy. We might talk about morality in times of war. Obviously, there's going to be an effectiveness angle to this. We might talk about the impact on post-war societies. We might talk about the rights of civilians. We might even talk about the rights of soldiers or other religious individuals, or we might even talk about religion in general. So the general point of step one is to not blindside yourself and to sort of map out everything you can think of in the debate. Step two is then thinking what are important conclusions for your case. A good metric for this is knowing, so if the judge buys these ideas, you win, or you are successful as a team. So you want to keep your eye essentially on the goal. And these are things that you as a team have agreed that you don't want to give up. So in this case and in this motion, it might be one conclusion is that we will lose more lives if we don't start making this a tactic of war. It's a conclusion that if the judge believes, yeah, you are going to lose more lives if you don't do this, you are likely to win. Another one is you want the judge to believe that it does not infringe on an individual's human rights. So I just have two there. You might have more. You might even have less and believe that your team should only drive towards one conclusion. It's up to you. But again, now that you've mapped out your debate, as a whip, you should always keep your eye on the goal, or just always have an understanding of what you're supposed to be defending and what are the most important things. Obviously, your constructive speakers are going to build around these issues. Your job as a whip is only to remember them and to not lose sight of them for now. Last thing you want to do is you want to set your preferred priority of the debate. So if push comes to shove, would you prefer short term over long term, which is what I set in this example? The idea that my preferred priority of the debate, if I have to weigh, is I'm going to argue why the short term gains is way better and more important than any of the long term harms because we have more time to plan and to think about it or so on. Or I want to talk about and believe that an overall impact to society and peace is worth sacrificing the quality of individuals' day-to-day lives if they can't access these important religious spaces. That doesn't mean that your constructive speakers aren't going to argue both or that they're just going to completely drop the ball. But this is an understanding of priority and weighing from you as a whip and knowing exactly if you had to weigh or where are your strong suits and deciding these priorities already at the get-go. These will help us in the second part. So just remember that in the first part in prep, you're not making any solid, concrete decisions in your speech as to this issue must come out. But you already have an idea of the issues that will come out, what you're going to defend, and maybe some of the standards that you can already use and are likely to use, so that when it comes time to actually give your speech, you can draw from all of these things that you've already thought of. So planning is really important in prep. Don't just leave your whip speech to chance in these instances. So now that we're done with the first part, second part, see, we're almost done. Actually, we are almost done. Is how you're supposed to handle things now that you're within the round. So there are generally two things you want to do in a round. The first is you want to constantly be spotting issues. So in case you're not sure what issues are, there are clashing values in the debate. So obviously, I think everyone sort of heard of issues and that they're clashing values. But I think an important thing to note is that these disagreements between government side and opposition side aren't restricted to arguments. So if at any point you see we're having a disagreement on a metric, on a characterization, on an outcome, or even just on a definition, these are already issues of the debate. So if you're finding that maybe our arguments aren't aligning, they're not really clashing. Why? Because there's an overarching characterization, or maybe there's even just a setting battle that's happening that's causing our arguments not to clash. Then these are the issues of the debate. And that's how you should approach issues. Not that you're looking for specific arguments, not that you're looking for a perfect fit, that they're going to be the absolute negative of whatever you're saying. It's just that it's a disagreement that you should note, and it can come in any form within the debate as long as it's part of the debate. Like ad hominem disagreements don't count as issues. But another thing you might notice is that as much as issues are about things that are said, issues can also be the unanswered but necessary questions in the debate. So when you're looking for issues, you want to also look for what's going unsaid in the opposition team. What are they avoiding? What do they not want to answer? Because the inability to answer can also be an issue within the debate. So basically, the summit, you're looking for everything, but you're more specific in that these things have to clash. An important note as part of why you should look for unanswered questions is because you don't want to base your issues on airtime. Meaning, okay, I've spotted the issues. My opponent spent most of her speech talking about the first issue, therefore, it's probably the most important. Don't base your issues on how much airtime speakers can give them, because speakers can be flawed in that they might not always prioritize what could be the most important issue of the debate, or they might be super comfortable with a certain argument. They know that they can fly, that they can run it in 2 minutes and save the rest of the time for just additional things to add to their speech. So airtime isn't a reliable metric. It can be used to tell you what opposition feels is important in the debate, but don't make it your only metric and don't make it your most important metric. It should be about things that are clashing. Second, so this is assuming you've already spotted the issues, you sort of, as the debate goes by, have a list of things that are clashing. Next thing you want to do is assess the issues. So you want to assess them on the relevance to the debate, because what you're trying to do is to give priority, because obviously you're on a ticking time bomb here, on what should I spend my time on building issues around and rebutting, and what can I do away with even at the start of my speech by saying these are irrelevant to the debate, so on and so forth. So this should just be a quick sorting of, okay, I have these issues, these are relevant, these are not, these are relevant, these are not. And this should be a continuous process. As you find more issues, automatically try to sort them. Let's assume you've already gotten your relevant pile and your irrelevant pile that you know you can quickly dispose of through arguments, or not arguments, you can't argue, through rebuttals or quick clarifications. The next thing you want to examine in your issue is, do they hurt your main case or your conclusion? So remember, you've sort of already planned out in prep, and your team has decided these are the biggest arguments or the biggest conclusions we have to drive at. Do these issues that you find directly harm your ability to provide these conclusions, or are they minor issues? They can still be relevant, but they can be minor. Because next is what you want to sort is whether something is low priority or a high priority issue. And you do that by basing it on whether it targets your main case or main conclusion. And you can only do that if in prep you've already thought of your conclusion or your case. It can't be that within the round you start to assess, so what really is my team fighting for? And then try to figure it out from there. You should already know that by prep, so that when you're assessing issues, you can say, all right, this harms my case pretty badly. It's a high priority issue. I should spend more time defending and trying to attacking this. This is an important issue, but I can sort of defend it by saying that in the priority of issues, it's not important, or by using my standards to say, yeah, it's a long-term harm, but it's not as important. Therefore, I can weigh it out of the debate. Then it might become a low priority issue. So then you want to sort it as low. But that's exactly the third thing you have to do, is can they be resolved through your established priorities? That doesn't mean you're not going to rebut the arguments that fall within these issues. It just means that you already have something to build off when you're making these issues. So you might not have to start from scratch. You might not have to think of everything within the issue and build from the ground up, because you've already said and thought of in prep, all right, I know how to defend these standards that I've made, so that the weighing is done. All I need to do is think of a rebuttal, and then I can plug it into the weighing and an issue header, and I'm done. And this is a continuous cycle that you should be doing every single speaker, even during your speakers, during their speakers, during the downtime while the judge is drinking water or whatnot. Spot issues, assess, sort. Spot issues, assess, sort. And I guess you should only stop when you feel that you've already got a solid speech, somewhat a little closer to maybe when DLO is ending or when GovWhip is ending. Then that's when you can already start, I guess, assessing everything afterwards. But while a speaker is talking, it should be that constant spotting, assess, constant spotting, assess. So this is an example of how we're going to do it. Same motion. Again, we're just using one motion for this entire lecture, that this house believes that attacking religious sites is a legitimate tactic of war. So this is a scenario. Opposition, assuming this is LO, has launched 3 arguments. First, that the religion and access to these spaces is a fundamental right. Second, that it can embolden the opposition. And third, that the military does not have resources to be able to do this. Like, I don't know, we don't have enough drones to bomb churches or whatnot. So let's take the first, that religion and the access to these spaces is a fundamental right. So is it relevant to the debate? Probably, because you want to know, and one of your main conclusions is about rights and about it being legitimate. So already from your first assessment, it's relevant. You're probably going to have to rebut it. You're going to have to include it into the issue. Second question then, how does it fare in comparison to your goals? So is it something that directly harms or something that doesn't harm? automatically. You might be able to argue at some point that it doesn't harm because while it's a right, it might not be a human right or a fundamental right, but it might automatically clash with your goal in terms of it does not fringe on an individual's human rights. If you're looking at the PowerPoint, you've noticed all the things I've planned in prep, the goals and priority are on the right side because that's what their use is. You should be able to look back at them and sort of bump what OP is saying against them. So religion and the access to these spaces is a fundamental right. Against the first test of relevance, it passes, so you still have to talk about it. Does it harm your goal? Yes, probably, because it might have an issue with your second goal on does it infringe on individuals' human rights. So it might be a high priority in this debate. Third, do you have a current prioritization that can address it? Whether you're talking about short-term versus long-term or the overall impact to society versus quality of individuals. You might, but you might notice that your priorities might not fit exactly into this because you can try and saying, well, even if it's a right, we have to talk about the overall impact to society or whatnot, but and the impacts to society and the impacts to quality of life. So what you should notice here is that in the priorities you've set, it's not always working out, or you might not have a standard or weighing that fits into the current issue. So you've noticed it directly affects your goal, but you don't have a priority for it. So now you know what you need to do, that it's a high priority issue, so you should rebut it, but you don't have standards to weigh it correctly, so you should make different standards. And this is where you can sort of adjust so you know, do I need to adjust? Do I not need to adjust? That's why you constantly have to assess it. Let's try the second one. Elo again argues, we're going to embolden the opposition and I don't know, they might become more radical in their attacks. Is it relevant? Yes, probably highly likely that it's relevant. Does it affect the goal that you are trying to achieve in this debate, which is to prove that we will lose more lives if we don't do this now? Yes, obviously it does, because we're talking about saving more lives, and if OP is talking about that emboldening the opposition can make them more radical in their attacks, can escalate violence, that directly contradicts goal number one. So against the second issue, the second assessment, again, it's high priority. But last, in your priority of the debate, does it fall under short-term, long-term, overall impact to society or not? Here's the thing. You're not sure because opposition can argue it emboldens the opposition in the long run to create bigger movements against you, or they can argue short term that it does escalate attacks. So that's when you're going to have to wait. If they argue it solely on long term, then you already have a priority set to be able to sort of shove or give less relevant to their argument. That doesn't mean you're not going to rebut it, but it means you already have something, so it might not be the highest priority to handle right now. If they argue in the short term and it fits into your priority, then again, you're going to have to adjust. And that's the constant thing you have to do in your debate. Are you comfortable just rebutting it? Do you need new analysis to weigh to adjust? If not, move on, or if not, go again. Try again with the third one. Then Elo argues the military just doesn't have the resources for this. Again, this is slightly more simple because this one falls under the first assessment of is it relevant? You can just say that's not relevant, fiat rule, and just toss it out of the debate. And you've saved a lot of time. So again, every time you spot an issue or something is clashing, you have to question, is it really relevant to the debate? Second, does it really harm the goals that I'm trying to establish? But third, do I already have a prioritization that I made in prep that can handle this such that I don't have to spend so much time investing in it? So what makes it easy to be able to do this? Because that sounds like a lot to be able to help your partners out. You want to listen, but at the same time, while you're listening, you're also making these decisions, is two things. The first is you have to actively and not passively listen. By the way, I'm on the next slide with Van Gogh and his single ear. That means you're not listening to it like it's ambient background noise. You're actually genuinely trying to listen to every word that they say And that takes active effort. So you want to actively listen. But two, you don't want to overtly actively listen with a motive. That means you're not just listening because I'm waiting for the argument to come out. So you're just passively listening, and then when they say my first argument, and then you're suddenly listening. Or I'm waiting for them to slip up by saying this word or whatnot. Then you're listening with like an ulterior motive, and that's still not the correct way to listen. So when you're listening, it should generally just try to encompass every single thing that they say. It's generally a tall order and probably the hardest thing to do in round, to listen while also making these micro decisions of, okay, I heard it, relevant, I've heard it, not. But with enough practice, it should be faster to make these decisions, and you should sort of get used to it, and your brain will eventually go on autopilot on being able to sort it. So that's a constant thing you should be doing in round. Remember, it's after you're done with your assessment, you always have to go back to issue spotting. After you're done with issue spotting, go back to your assessment. It is constant that you're doing in round. Okay, third part then. We have to talk about what you're going to do in your speech. Let's go to the next slide. So the first thing I have your speech for the speech portion of this lecture are just general tips on how you're going to be able to execute it all better. The first is to be flexible in your writing/paper style. Because note that as you're doing things in round, your decision might change. So for example, LO argues something that you don't feel is relevant, but DLO has been able to save it and add relevance to it. That means from your initial assessment, you're going to have to reassess and change it. So a lot of times you're going to be moving robot around, maybe crossing things out. And you kind of have to know yourself here. Some people think they're neat, but they're not actually neat, and they can't pull off the one paper style and realize they can't actually read their own writing. In that case, I would suggest having multiple papers to sort of be able to sort around as the issues change. If you are ultra type A, and I know a lot of people who are ultra type A who are able to make edits on a single paper and still be flexible about it, then go ahead and do it. But let's not kid ourselves. If you're not neat and you don't have great handwriting like me, then just be flexible with your paper and your writing style. Second tip is to organize the debate like you're trying to make sense of the debate yourself. So don't argue an issue just because you think the judge wants that issue to be first, or you feel like in other trainings or when you've heard this debate before, a previous whip in another round said this was the issue, so this should be the issue. Argue it like you're trying to make sense of the debate yourself. So if you yourself can't justify why this is the issue of the debate, why I'm rebutting like this, then chances are your speech isn't going to be believable. The beauty about whipping is you're actually thinking out loud and trying to clarify the debate for yourself, but you just happen to have an audience while you're doing that. So make sure you organize the debate in a way that makes sense to you and not to how you think other people want it to sound. But last is to start with what confuses you the most. I think common sense is a very good indicator of whether an argument launched by the opposition is successful or whether an issue has become really problematic and really big in the debate. So if you are naturally confused by something, chances are other people are as well. And that's where you should start. Because you can't clarify the debate when there's this big overarching issue that's confusing you and you're trying to justify everything else. So don't avoid it. Just generally start disentangling the debate and the exchanges by what confuses you. Trust your common sense if you think you have. Okay, so now to the actual structure of the speech. The first thing you have to know, and also this is the next slide after the tips, is that you have to get into the mindset that opposition did nothing right. Whether that's because it'll help you get over whatever emotional weaknesses you feel you're currently feeling or your nerves, or because it gets you into the mindset to always look meticulously at arguments and to always assume there's something wrong so you can spot them easier. Assume opposition, or if you're government, in every argument, in every characterization, in every strategic misstep, they did it wrong. Because that'll help you spot things, and it'll force you to spot things. Because if your assumptions they did it wrong, then you're forced to justify it to yourself. But the second thing that I think is important in WIP is the reason why you want to assume they did it wrong is that you don't let anything skip you. A lot of the time, some WIPs will jump to weighing, or will jump to which one's more important, or which one is the priority of the debate. The problem with this is it's giving your opponent a freebie in assuming they argued it correctly in the first place or that it's true. Remember, your weighing is sort of the even if version of your constructive speaker's arguments. It should only be used as a point of saying, well, even if this was true, or even if this was correct. So the reason why you want to assume they did nothing right is to get to the habit of always rebutting every concept completely first. Within your issue, you want to get down because you don't want to leave anything to chance. That means you have to rebut it completely in that saying it's not true, it's unlikely to happen, and so even if it's true that it might work out, it's unlikely that it's going to be the scenario that's going to play out most of the time anyway. So it's not enough for opposition side to say that there's an alternate scenario might exist. They also have a burden of proving why this so-called alternate scenario is something that is going to happen more often than it doesn't happen. So first step always within your issues, assuming you've got the right issues, is to rebut all the concepts that fall under this issue completely. Note that I use concepts and not arguments, because at this point, if you're just thinking that only arguments will fall under issues, then you're going to miss a large chunk of the debate, and chances are you're going to miss a lot of the strategic decisions that the first speakers have said. So even characterizations, standards, metrics can fall under, if they aren't issues, they can fall within an issue and still can be worth rebutting. That's why I say rebut every important concept completely. So don't restrict yourself to the idea that you're only there to rebut arguments, or that you're only there to sort arguments out. Remember, back to going to spotting issues, if it's a clashing point, then it's something that definitely needs to be rebutted first. That's the first thing you got to do within your issue. Rebut every important concept completely. How to respond completely? Next speaker is probably going to talk about that. Hi, Mikey. Second thing, after you're done rebutting, and I assumed you've rebutted, then that's when you want to start weighing. And this is where you can use your priorities. Remember, in prep, you've sort of already established your priorities in the step. And even within round, you've adjusted your priorities in such a way that you can fit it better to what opposition is saying. So this is the time to use it and to start making trade-offs and say, fine, even if it's true, but we're not assuming that it's true because I already rebutted, blah, blah, blah. It takes less weight in this debate. It's not as important. They're not the main actor, so on and so forth, just to give yourself an edge. I highly recommend that even when weighing, individuals go, like, make scenarios where it's you have to make trade-offs and hard lines. Because if you argue or if you weigh in a very generalist perspective that we get the best of both worlds, then the judge is generally just going to take everything as equally important within this debate. And what happens then is usually the one who argues better is the one who wins. So the reason weighing and making hard lines and trade-offs is important is because it can close skill gaps. What do I mean by that? Meaning, even if your government argued certain things skillfully and probably better than you, can prove they are not as relevant in the debate, then regardless of how well they proved it to be true, if it does not fit into the priorities, if it's not something we care about right now, it can diminish the value of the argument. And that's what's important. And that's how you get to close skill gaps if you feel that your opponent is stronger than you, by trying to diminish what they've said in terms of relevance and in terms of importance of the debate. Because remember, if you don't want to make trade-offs and hard lines and try to win everything in a sum of all parts. When we weigh everything the stronger team has said versus everything the weaker team has said, chances are the stronger team is going to win by virtue of their skill. So that's how you sort of chip away at what they've said, is when you start making trade-offs and hard lines, because you don't want the judge to assume everything is equal at this point, because it's just probabilistic that they're going to be better than you when you sum everything up. But if you're able to say the things where you're strong at, the things that you're good at arguing are the ones that are more important in this debate, that's when you can start equalizing the playing field. And that's why weighing through trade-offs and more hardline stances tend to be more important. And if your opposition tries to make it on, well, everything's important, or we get our cake and eat it too, the thing that is always useful to say is that it's just not realistic for either side to be able to win on all accounts, because that's not how life works. Let's go to the next slide. So I think the last and the most important thing is, after you've weighed, after you've rebutted, after you've said your issues, is to conclude your issues. I'm just going to say it the second time. You have to conclude your issues. Don't just leave your weighing up in the air. And the reason is because you don't want to take any chances. You want to be clear that how you want the judge to appreciate your issue is the same way the judge is going to appreciate your issue. So yes, judges do have different styles of valuing issues and valuing how speakers structure and what comes out. But to minimize the difference in how they accept your issue or how they value it is by concluding your issues. And the simplest way I can explain that is by saying that it is the implications and the impacts of your rebuttals and weighing have on the actual debate. I guess some people might call it the meta, but I think it's still generally part of the bigger debate at hand. So an example of sentences that tell me you're concluding an issue and not just weighing is establishing what you've proven. So saying you've proven that X actor is more important than Y through your rebuttals, through your issue, through your weighing. And because you've proven this, it shows that, I don't know, government side did not fulfill their goal. Or it shows that their case, which rested on this assumption, which you've proven is not only untrue, but irrelevant to the debate, proves that the judge should not take it as the main consideration of the debate. Or you can say that you cannot value this argument more than ours because of this issue. Or you can even make concessions already at whip because of that. So again, conclude your issues, because this is about leaving as little as possible to chance, because you are the last speaker with big impact. Replies are important as well. But again, you're the last one who generally a lot of judges listen to with full focus. That's why you don't want to let any chance to tell them how they should appreciate this debate go. That's what concluding their issues is all about. So that's the end. Just a recap, when you're whipping, you want to always be in this mindset in prep, within the round, and during your speech. In prep, you want to be able to have the bare bones structures or understand the issues of the debate, because you control 50% of the debate, and you coming out of prep should reflect the whip who sort of has an understanding of how half the debate's already going to work out. Within the round, it's always about listening and constantly judging what you've listened to. So don't save it to right before your speech where you decide, yeah, okay, this is relevant. No, this is what I should rebut. It's sorting and sorting again and organizing, and it is a cycle that should constantly happen. Lastly, within your speech, now that I've assumed everything is sorted, remember, rebut, weigh, then conclude. And that's it. If you have any questions, I guess now is the time to type it. I don't know how long I'm supposed to wait. I guess a minute. Okay. I will wait a minute. And if you are unable to ask questions now, that's okay, because just ask Mikey in the next one. because she will answer both of our questions. Okay, we have one. Any tips to avoid new matter? Okay, the easiest way I've found to avoid new matter is to frame the matter as an example. So, for example, if you want to say that that's not true, and you want to argue something else, then frame it as a situation which you're demonstrating. You're not arguing that X will lead to Y. You're just telling people that in this certain instance in this country, X left to Y. You leave the conclusion sort of up to them to decide. But it's very obvious because you've given them a visceral image of what happens that sticks in their heads. So I would frame, if you feel it's sort of coming out as new matter, frame it as an example of you, like a literal example. If you don't have a literal example, then just a demonstration of how your arguments, how your constructive speaker's arguments would play out. So you're just giving a picture to something that's already been established in the debate, which I don't really think is arguing, because that's just giving an example. And even whips can give examples and cite instances where it works, because that's also part of rebutting as well. So as long as you frame it as you just demonstrating a previous analysis or just showing an instance where that's happened, then it's highly unlikely that's going to be flagged as new matter. Second question, what's the worst scenario that whips are facing during the debate? I would say the worst scenarios that whips face during the debate is not want to adjust, and your whip speech generally becomes irrelevant because you're whipping for a different debate. There are instances where opposition has brought out a completely radical case at deputy that you are going to have to adjust to and maybe create an entirely new issue where I've had to personally scrap issues altogether because of what the deputies have done to my life. But you have to be flexible and you have to do that, because an attempt to be clear and responsive to what they've said is more valuable than saying things that sound nice but are not relevant because you weren't listening or because you were afraid to adjust. So I think that's the worst scenario, is you have a speech but you're frozen because deputy did something different and now you're not so sure what to do, because then you just become irrelevant in the debate. So I'd say that's the worst scenario. Third question, what are the most mistakes beginner whips make and how to avoid them? Most common, I guess, mistakes that beginner whips make is shotgun rebuttals. That a lot of the times when you read whip manuals, it tells you the whip is the summary speaker. They summarize the debate and rebut. And beginner whips tend to do that literally by saying, so what did government talk about? What did opposition talk about? How am I going to rebut then? And the reason that's an easy mistake is because a lot of people have defined whipping that way. But I think a better way to think of whipping is you're the one who's trying to recap in a more strategic way and organizing it in a way that makes sense for you and that makes sense for everyone. So if you're just summarizing unbiasedly, then I think that's an easy beginner whip mistake, because books tell you you're just there to summarize and then rebut. But no, your summary should already think about what's a strategic way to summarize. That's why issues are there, because issues are sort of the banner of how you summarize. That's you saying, this debate, I'm going to be summarizing it by saying that it falls under three main issues. So if you're a beginner whip, know that when someone tells you to summarize the debate, they don't mean it literally in the grocery list of what op said and what gov said, but in the strategic way that how can I tell everyone what happened in this debate in a way that makes them want to vote for my side. Next, how do you manage to organize your ideas, especially when too many ideas fly during the discourse? Okay. I used to have this problem before when there are a lot of speakers who are like, I have one argument and 5 levels of analysis on why it works. the easiest way is to look either at the premise or the conclusion, because their various levels of analysis don't make sense unless it's tied to a single conclusion or to a single premise. Otherwise, it wouldn't be levels of analysis because there would be nothing relating there. So you want to target the commonality. So, like, for example, in the motion that we set on how targeting religious sites is a legitimate tactic of war, you could then LO talks about, I have 5 analysis on how it's going to prolong the war. Then you can talk about what really prolongs wars and why none of the analysis fit into what we think really prolongs wars. So you want to focus, if you feel like it's being thrown at you a lot, focus again on the conclusion or the premise, or if they're distinctly unrelated ideas, that generally means that several of them are going to be irrelevant in this debate, because judges don't generally have the capacity to talk about that, but even their whips aren't going to one by one talk about all their analysis all the time. So if you notice, maybe level 3, 4, 5 or something that he's argued in 30 seconds, but his first and second level of analysis each got 2 minutes. And he spent a lot of time, and then DLO even reiterated it and wanted to defend it so badly, and it bumps against your goals. Then that's when you know that this is what I'm going to focus, and you have to be willing to let certain ideas go unrebutted or just mildly rebutted in favor of the bigger fish. Next, how do you strategically weave new analysis in your whip speech? Strategically weaving new analysis. So, three instances where I think there's the best times to weave quote-unquote new analysis. The first is when you're weighing. Because if they did not prove, or if opposition was not able to prove the link or the so what in the debate, it is in the weighing that you get to dictate the so what for them and reanalyze the value of their arguments. So that comes in weighing. And even in being able to say your trade-off is a unique analysis that not a lot of constructive speakers have time to talk about because they don't see the big picture of the debate yet. So I'd say that's the first area where there's a lot of time to weave new analysis. Second, in demonstrating how opposition speeches work. So again, this goes back to the previous question, how we can add new matter. Putting examples not only to your own arguments, but even putting examples into opposition's arguments and actualizing them into real pictures can lead you to reanalyze their arguments in a way they haven't. And it's somewhat sneaky to do it for them, but that's another avenue to reanalyze the debate. Last area where you can add new analysis is through your concluding of your issues. Remember, you're talking about the impacts of why you made this an issue. What's the implication because you won this issue? And that's, I guess, a deeper level of analysis into the debate because you're already talking about how the judge should appreciate it. But it's still an avenue when you can talk about different types of analysis. So I would say those three. Leave the direct rebuttals as is, but then you can talk about the conclusion of your issues in the weighing or in the missing so whats of either your arguments, hopefully your team doesn't have any, or in their arguments. Other question. As a whip, how would you make a deputy's incomplete argument to count when whips aren't allowed to? Okay. So how do you save your failing deputy, in other words? Again, it all goes back to actualizing your deputy's speech. You can't argue for them, but that doesn't stop you from describing the scenario. I guess I'm quite visual when I try to think of things. So instead of saying, how does this work? I just kind of put it to a scenario. I put it to a demonstration that I think is already worked. So it fills in the analysis. And as a matter of fact, the judge is probably filling in the gaps of the analysis themselves when you've given them a picture that seems realistic. They may not realize that your analyzing, or that they themselves are filling in the blank pieces of analysis. Because when you have an example and a demonstration that seems intuitive, they're more likely to believe it already. But secondly, how to make up for a deputy's incomplete argument is to just not say that they had an incomplete argument. Um, truthfully justify what they've already proven, but a lot of the times, it comes from pointing out the value in what they've proven. So you can usually hide the missing analysis as a conclusion or as how should we appreciate the debate. So if he has a half-finished argument, the conclusion can come in your wing as, why is this argument important? Because we think it's able to um, reflect, or because it shows the effects on XYZ actors. And it all relies on the premise that my deputy already talked about. So highlight why your new analysis would not stand without the deputy's premises or without whatever the deputy said, so that you can always link it back and say, because I'm talking about what they said, and it did come from a line of analysis that they started, it's not new matter. How to give fresh new analysis to what your previous speaker said without sounding that you're building in whip. Same thing. Generally, demonstration have a lot of examples. That's how you ground it. But if you're asking fresh new analysis, but I think the question here is also, do you want to give really new analysis into the arguments of your deputy? Because if at that point in their whip where you feel like you need to give new analysis to the argument, then it might be an indicator that the argument itself was ineffective or not important. So when that scenario happens where you as a whip feel like your deputy's argument totally needs new analysis, then what you could probably do is, one, focus really, really hard on rebutting, because that might mean your constructives aren't going to be what's going to win you the debate, and that can happen. Or two, go back to demonstrating and to lay out how his arguments are going to work in real life. Or three, if your prime minister or your leader of opposition has already set out various different stakeholders in the debate. So for example, you have an argument that already talks about the minorities, and then you want to talk about society in general, and arguments throughout your constructive speakers have generally talked about these two actors, but your deputy has forgotten to talk about one actor. It's okay to bring these actors back up into the discussion and to sort of bring up the forgotten people from your first speaker and show how they apply as well within deputy speech. Because that's another way to bring new analysis to it. In a scenario where there are so many issues in the debate, what strategies can whips take? That's where concluding your issues are important. Because obviously, if there are a lot of issues, I think to be strategic before speaking, you've already decided which ones you want to focus on. What your conclusion does in justifying your speech then is it tells you why these issues are more important even than other issues within the debate. So you are probably going to have to weigh issues against issues, which is already very metaing the issues. But you wouldn't have a problem with that if you're concluding your issues correctly. So that even if there are a lot of issues in the debate, yours stand out because yours have a conclusion, and because the judge can easily, within his head or within his notes, recognize that you've justified why that issue is there over other issues that take place in the debate. Yes, there are many, but remember, you only need to win the important ones to win the debate. It's not about winning the most number of issues. It's just about proving this issue is the most important, and if you won it, you've done your job as a whip. And you want everyone in the debate to realize that it's not about the most number of issues that they win. And usually you can even explicitly say that within your conclusion. That fine, there might be more issues within this debate, but the reason why we talked about this issue and why we won it is because it's the linchpin, or it's because it focuses on the actor that every single side, of which there are two, agreed to defend and agreed was the priority of this debate. So I guess that's how you do it, is to take special mention within your conclusion of your issues. Third to the last question. In BP, how do you mention your openings without highlighting their case even more than yours? In the instance of both weighing cases and using all of our cases to clash and rebut the opposing side. I have usually a special issue that's just based on which issue is more important. But that's something I generally only do in BP. Or if I don't have time for that, again, that's why concluding your issues is more important. Because you can say, we won this issue as closing government. Opening government might have focused on this issue, but the reason why we focused on this, the reason why it's the most important debate, is because it's the only one that really addresses the needs of the stakeholders. It's the only one that answers the principle or the question of the debate, so on and so forth. So if we were to apply this to Asians, it's about concluding your issues. If we're going to apply this to BP, it's still about having solid conclusions to your issues and justifying it. Because again, you don't want to leave it to the judge to appreciate which issue is more important than the others. If, as much as possible, spoon feed him your preferred priority of issues through concluding your issues correctly. In BP, the special option is to have one that justifies why what you're talking about is more important than Gov. You can have an issue like that by saying, which actor is really the priority of this debate? And then you can weigh maybe the actor opening Gov said versus the actor that closing Gov said. It depends on the motion and how delineated your case is from opening. If it's a really delineated case, you can have your own separate issue completely and say that OG didn't even talk about it at all. If it's super similar to each other, then I would say your best bet is by winning on contributions instead, by saying, yeah, OG and CG both talk about this issue, but our contributions to these issues in terms of weighing why it was the most important, or of being able to rebut the most amount of things, means we're the ones who won the issue, even if we're all playing within the same issue. Next, in both AP and BP, is it more strategic for the whip to be the one to lead during prep? I think I believe that prep is based on the personality of individuals rather than the skill and the speaker role. So, no, I don't think it's strategic for whip just because you're whip to be the one to lead prep. If PM is good and has a good control over things and likes controlling their speech, PM might be the one to lead prep. If deputy is your best builder, has the most time, deputy can lead prep. If your whip doesn't like talking to you or is shy for some reason and is in debate, don't let them lead prep. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rules on who should lead prep. That's basically it. How do you strategically whip if there's not much to respond to from the other side without sounding like you're just summarizing your case? I think the best thing to do then is to build up opposition's case for them. And this is fun to do because then you sound super nice and you sound like you're taking care of all of ops failings. So you can talk about what they argued, but you can also critique it and say they've never argued it to the fullest extent, which should definitely be taken against them. But we're going to be generous as op and assume they've argued it to the fullest extent, which means what? Which means arguing X, Y, Z. So you are going to have to do some building in whip, but because it sounds like you're just doing them a favor and you're only doing it for the purpose of rebutting it or of saying, well, they didn't explore the spectrum, but we're going to respond to the best case and worst case that they've never even bothered to build. Note that we're doing their job for them, so they should still get points taken away. So that's how you essentially build up your speech. Just layer it with building and with insults to buy the time. Last, what personal practices other than case building with your partners can whips benefit from? I would say a good exercise is to generally watch debate videos and whip for them. So that means assume your government side, and as LO is arguing, start doing the example of issue spotting and sorting, and don't pause the video to give yourself more time. So you're watching a video and you're the imaginary whip. Spot issues, sort, spot issues, and sort. And the good thing about this is, especially if it's a high level debate that you're watching, is you can compare your organization and your issue spotting to that of the actual whip. So, how close were you to deciding on similar issues? Was your prioritization of arguments being a high threat or a low threat the same as theirs? If you notice things were radically different and you can sort of trust that they were a good whip, then you know that you need to adjust, but to also help you get faster in making those decisions so that it becomes intuitive, relevant, not relevant. I remember, and then you become more aware of memorizing the goal and your priorities. You can say not in line with our goal. You want to be faster in making these micro decisions, and the best way to do that is to constantly try doing them. That means watching debate videos so you can do it alone, or you can do it in training. What if the other whip concluded the issues very well and was also able to prove why their issues are the most important? How will you win your case without running out of time due to many rebuttals and analysis? The easy answer is, even if they concluded well, conclude better than them. But I guess the other way to do that, especially if you think that your strong point is you have a lot of rebuttals and a lot of analysis, is to say that their issues only work and only fly assuming that their arguments were even true in the first place, which they're not. So note that they only win under the even if it was true, which you don't want to admit, but you can say in the worst case, fine, they win assuming that they were able to prove it. But because we've spent so much time rebutting it and have proven that these things aren't true, they should be the first consideration before talking about the issues or concluding why that's something that's important. But that also depends on knowing your team's strengths. So are you better at proving that these issues were important, or are you better at rebutting and analyzing? And that's where you want to focus the judges' attention to the idea that, well, yeah, they were really good at that. But that means they're only good at arguing even if, and they're only good at proving it, assuming their case flies. So they just skip the step. And that's how I would generally frame their side. So yeah, that's it. Are there any more questions? It's done. Again, if you have more questions or anything you want to ask me, there's still another speaker. Bye. Oh wait, there's a last one. Okay, this is like a beauty queen question. What was the most memorable whip speech you've made, and why was it memorable in connection to the workshop? I don't. Why was it memorable in connection to the workshop? I don't know. I think I'm just gonna lose Miss Universe if I can't answer this. I'd like a lot of my whip speeches, so I can cop out and say all of them are memorable. And it's related to the workshop because this is a whip speech lecture. Sorry. That's why I'm in competitive debate. Okay, like last 5 seconds. Okay, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the PDU page.